Welcome to the Florida Civic Advance First Friday webinar. I'm your host, Kristen Barton, along with Dr. Scott Paine. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Kristen. Glad to have you with us as always. We get to do a lot of programs together. This is our first Friday, and I'm glad that we get to do it together.
Before I go over a few housekeeping items, let me introduce Bob Jones, board member of the Florida Civic Advance. Good morning. I almost said good morning. We just talked about this. Good afternoon, Bob.
Hey, Kristen. The Florida Civic Advance was created in 2015 to address civic deficits and celebrate and highlight civic excellence in Florida communities. We've hosted 3 summits statewide and a regional summit in Greater Miami. And as a nonpartisan convener, we build connections with leaders and organizations in public, private, and nonprofit sectors to advance civic practices in Florida's communities. Our First Fridays program, which started in February, will highlight civic excellence and innovation in Florida's communities. And we've created a new nonprofit statewide membership organization and invite you to join us to help us figure out how to advance civic excellence in your community. We'll talk later at the end about membership. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob.
Before I hand things over to Scott, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. There will be a questions and answers portion at the end of today's webinar. We encourage you to submit your questions at any time using the chat box feature on your Zoom window. I will be keeping track of all the questions as we move through today's session. Today's session will be recorded and available on the Florida Civic Advance website in a few days. Are you ready, Scott?
I'm ready, Kristen. Thank you very much for getting us started here. And Bob, thanks for being with us and for all the work you've done on Florida Civic Advance for all these many years. Bob really was one of those founding voices to help this initiative move forward. And I am very grateful for the work that you all and others have been doing. So what we're going to do today is not that. We've already done the video. We're going to talk today in this particular session for the First Friday program about leveraging contacts. I work closely in local government with the Florida League of Cities. And so I have a lot of contact with people in local and both city and county government who are finding creative ways to take a point of contact with citizens and expand the way in which we can engage citizens in the conversations that we're having. And so I've been fortunate enough to have the guests we have with us today who've agreed to spend some time talking about their experiences. From the city of Port St Lucie, sorry. We have Linda McCarthy, Director of Mid-Florida Event Center. Linda, great to see you this afternoon.
Good afternoon. So happy to be here, Scott.
Also from the city of Port St Lucie, Kate Parmalee, Director of Strategic Initiatives and Innovation. Kate, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Scott.
From Seminole County, we have Rick Durr, who is the Director of the Leisure Services Department. Rick, thanks for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
And from the city of Tallahassee, we have Ashley Edwards, the Director of Parks, Recreation, and Neighborhood Affairs. Ashley, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
All right, so we're just going to have a conversation about the work that you all been doing. And the reason that we reached out to each of you is that I had the opportunity to find out about, in one way or another, something relatively creative that's taken place that has expanded connections with the community coming through the work that you do. And so I want to start with, we're going to have an opportunity to kind of blend the work that you're doing and see the lessons that come out of them. But I want to start by giving our audience a little sense of the story, what was going on with each one of you. And I want to start with Port St Lucie. And I think mostly, Linda, this is going to be you that's going to help us talk about this story, because this does take us back to the early days of COVID. And I need to promise our audience, we are not going to do COVID very much during this broadcast. I know we're all so over it, except that there are lessons we learned and experiences we had. So we're going to do that here. Linda, what was going on in this particular situation has to do with the facility you operate, which is the Mid-Florida Credit Union Event Center. Just tell us a little bit about the event center and then how it was affected by the early onset of COVID.
Sure. Thank you, Scott. So the Mid-Florida Event Center in Port St Lucie, Florida is a 100,000 square foot event center. We're doing about, well, prior to that fateful day in February, I won't say the COVID word, but We were doing about 335 event days a year, Scott, which, is a pretty busy building, and many of those are community events. And then the last show we did was a Styx performance, great concert outside, and it sold out. And then we immediately shut down right after that. But I think based on the subject matter today, I think, not really going back to the COVID time, but what we did to going forward to try to be creative to help our community. And so with the schools shut down, basically everything shut down, there was really no place for the kids to go while their parents had to go to work. And so as part of, and Kate will talk a little bit about the city's strategic plan, but part of our strategic plan to help our community, especially in times of needs, we reached out to the Boys and Girls Club and said, what can we do to help? Where are these kids going to go while their parents have to go to work because they're out of school? And so it was a really critical time of what was going on here, as all cities were going through. And so we ended up doing the summer camps here, believe it or not, in pods of 10 kids. We had 300 kids a day. We were doing 600 meals a day under strict COVID guidelines. And so what ended up happening is we did 14 weeks of that. Now, this was the height of that time frame, right? So we did 14 weeks of that. Again, 300 kids a day, 600 meals a day. And then we ended up doing 4 months of virtual learning for those same kids. So the community, all the parents, the schools, the school board, the Boys and Girls Club boards, they were just so grateful for us to be able to do something like that and get creative with what we did, marking floors. And, the kids were very, very well behaved. It was the adults that we had trouble following the guidelines. And it ended up, and if you think about it, going forward and what we've been through the past few years, this ended up being a permanent situation. So our city council ended up approving a 3-year agreement, and now we're up to 500 kids a day and 1,000 meals a day. And it's just been a wonderful thing that we've been able to give back to the community and help our Boys and Girls Club, which is definitely part of our city's strategic plan. So it's just been a wonderful experience, and it's ended up helping us out in the long run.
Yeah, I just love the picture in my mind of all of these kids in a place where usually you see people dressed appropriate for the event, if you will. So they might be dressed to the nines in the old style, or they might be dressed appropriate to the particular concert that they're attending. Right. But now you've got just the kids, dressed appropriate for being who they are in that same facility. And as you mentioned, this is all part of a strategic plan. And Kate, we will have a chance to talk about the strategic plan. But for the moment, Linda, this is not a one-off, right? It is part of a strategic plan. Can you give us a sense of how this particular partnership has spawned some other strong connections between the community and the event center?
Right. Well, the board members on the Boys and Girls Club, first of all, I could not have paid for the publicity that we got surrounding that program, right? The press covered us on a regular basis, TV, radio, print. They were out here on a regular basis. So again, you can't pay for that kind of publicity and that feel-good public relations that generated. But as those things were hitting Facebook, social media, all the publicity that we were getting, it gave us a chance to communicate with other people in the community, other nonprofits especially, that were looking for help. As we all know, these board members that sit on these nonprofits, they're very well connected, right? They're embedded in the community. They know people in the community. They're connected to our elected officials. And so as all that publicity was out on the street, we were getting contacted by other nonprofits and cultural organizations. As we're a diverse, inclusive, city for all people. So anything that we could do in that time frame, because quite frankly, I wasn't doing any events, right? So How do I keep the lights on, keep people working, generate some food and beverage revenue, and help our community at the same time? So as people were reaching out, I was accepting that. Yes, it was always yes. let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. How can we help? How can we help? And so again, this ended up being such a positive program for the long run, because I still currently have those events. And, you know, back in the critical time, did we step to the plate and not charge to use the facility? Of course, because that's just the way it was at that time. Now we're in the mode of things are getting better. We're out of COVID. We're now back to our entertainment schedule. And now we're generating rent from those events while still helping the community. So it's just been a win-win situation for us. And we kind of turned, you know, lemons into lemonade, for lack of a better term, while helping the community. And I can't be more proud of our staff here and what Kate has done to help our efforts with that through the strategic plan. And so, you know, it wasn't easy. You know, there was a lot of apprehension when you're talking about 250 kids and counselors and parents dropping off kids in the height of COVID, and, you know, the crowd aversion that we were all going through in our event facilities. But we found a way to do it using movable walls and pipe and drape and 6-foot tables. And it just ended up working out. And now here we are, you know, almost 3 years later with a whole slew of summer programming now that we normally would not have had.
That's awesome. Well, and I love, of course, the lemons to lemonade metaphor. We use that one a lot. And there are lots of different kinds of lemons. So Rick, in Seminole County, you were kind of handed a very different set of lemons because there was this golf course, you know, neighborhoods wrapped around it, and this golf course fails. Tell us a little bit about the Rolling Hills community and what was it about that golf course that brought residents to you?
So thanks again, Scott. The Rolling Hills, give you a little bit of background on the neighborhood. The golf course itself was established all the way back in 1926 in Central Florida. It predates Interstate 4, which when that was put through in the 1960s, it ended up being about 2 blocks away. By the late 70s, the neighborhood had developed completely around this golf course, which is Seminole County's oldest golf course. But by about 2014, again, just pre-COVID, the course had gone under. Had a different generation of residents now that had different priorities in mind. And the course was sold to a developer who had intentions of redeveloping the open space in this area for additional residential units. That brings us to 2015, when folks from that neighborhood said, "County, you need to help us."
Okay, so they're looking at what had been all this green space looking out on the golf course, and suddenly what they're going to be looking at is there's going to be a whole new set of subdivisions or subdivision going through that, and they were worried about losing the green space. But this already sounds like an expensive thing, because obviously there's going to be a buyout here to make this work one way or another. And then I think you got some more lemons when the county started looking into what it would take to do something with this property, right?
Exactly. So, by the way, the photograph behind me is Rolling Hills Golf Course after the county had purchased it. So you see, this is what folks are used to looking at out the backside of their homes. What we found out while we were going through the due diligence on this property, which is what we kind of expected, you'd expect to find some things in the soil and maybe in the groundwater after almost 100 years of golf use and fertilizers and pesticides, that you're going to expect to find some things in the ground that need to be dealt with. Well, when we were going midway through this process, we found out that we were going to need to remediate both some soil as well as some contaminated groundwater to the tune of about $1.5 million, none of which was part of our intention to go ahead and spend. As it was going to cost $4 million just to buy the property. So that's a big chunk.
So at this point, the conversation turns to how do you fund that? And for the benefit of our audience, because not everyone's going to be familiar with all of the acronyms of local government service, the conversation was about an MSBU, right? So what's an MSBU? So
an MSBU is Municipal Services Benefit Unit. And with Seminole County, we've got more than 24 of these throughout the county over time. And they're very specific areas that have a very specific levy, and I'll use the word specific again, on specific properties for a reason. We've got them everywhere from neighborhood lighting projects that are paid for over 10 years by an additional assessment on the property, landscape improvements, health of lakes within a neighborhood, kind of like what you see today in an HOA, but this is what the county uses in the unincorporated areas.
Okay, and so in order for all this to go forward, you're going to have this community, which came to you and said, we don't want to lose the green space, but they probably weren't thinking about $5.5 million, how that might work out. You got to get them on board. You got to get them involved in the process. And then there's also, okay, there is this property, you have to master plan it. That there's a lot of engagement with the community that's going to happen. And some of that is going to happen, during COVID. Talk about the various community engagement initiatives here. Were there homeowners associations already to work with, or did you have to start from scratch?
So the good news is we did not have to start from scratch. There was not an HOA, but there was a group of residents that banded themselves together in a grassroots effort called Save Rolling Hills, who then put together a fundraising campaign to at least put signs out and do some other things to try to rally the neighborhood. They specifically came to the Board of County Commissioners when the board said, we don't have the $1.5 million. And they said, why don't we put together an MSBU? And by doing such, they were going to have to commit to tax themselves, if you will, to pay for the remediation done on the property. That is a very complicated process. This was the largest MSBU we've ever looked at, with over 1,100 individual units involved in the area around the golf course. It needed to be organized, and they had 30 days to go ahead and get together enough ballots to try to say that, yes, we're behind this. The process is you've got to have 65% approval of all votes. So not just 65% approval of anyone who votes, it's of all 1,100 plus residents. That's a heavy load to lift. And that group worked directly with the county on being able to push that through. Incidentally, they ended up getting the highest level of approval of any MSBU in our history, up to over 75%. And if every vote counted, over 95% voted yes.
So this obviously sounds like a lot of meetings in people's houses and neighbors going door to door, and all this, and a close collaboration between the county staff and the community to make that all work.
Exactly. And so we had planned on, we purchased the property in August of 2018. We set up an entire master plan process that was going to use this neighborhood group and all of the contacts that we had made and everyone's home that we met in the neighborhood. And we got the contract together with our consultant, and COVID hit. And basically we ended up having to rewrite the entire process, where we now had to look at different ways to contact people, both online. Our in-person meetings went to Zoom meetings, which nobody at the time knew what a Zoom meeting was. I didn't know what a Zoom meeting was.
Right.
Our consultant put together a web platform. We put together pre-recorded presentations about the project. And the web platform we ended up having allowed people to leave anything from general comments, to take a survey, to take a tour of the master plan site, and then give us specific comments on anything that they liked or did not like. It was a very deep process, and we had excellent participation from that group, and we were able to complete that part of the process just after the lockdown.
Now, we're going to have a chance to talk a little bit more about some of this work that you've done, but let me ask the question I was asking Linda a moment ago. So you had this experience with Rolling Hills. Has that influenced work that the county has done since?
It most certainly has. Two ways. Number one is we put together a formal process now that if another golf course came to meet with the county, here's the process and here's what it looks like and here's the timetable and here's what it'll cost. Secondly, is what it did is it helped inform all the other projects that we have lined up. So even right now with the COVID situation that we have, all of those still factors are still counted as we're still going to do that as part of any large project. So even though we can meet face-to-face with folks, you can't underestimate the effectiveness of being able to bring along all of these other tools that were developed during COVID.
Very good. All right. So Ashley, let me turn to you and talk a little bit about what's happening in Tallahassee. So Tallahassee has this initiative, which is called Neighborhood First. Can you tell me a little bit about the Neighborhood First initiative itself?
Sure. So the Neighborhood First initiative was born out of an effort that was put in place to try to address some increased crime rates that we were seeing in certain segments of our community about 4 or 5 years ago. And what we did is we formed a public safety collective, which was a group of all the law enforcement folks in our county. Basically, we have, of course, several major universities, a community college, And then we have FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement's here for some of the state capitol kinds of stuff, as well as our police chief and our sheriff for the county. And so we got the group together, and one of the things that came out of their conversations was the fact that we can't police our way out of all of the issues that create the impetus behind some of the crime that's occurring. There's some times when it's flat out is a police issue, it's an enforcement issue, but there's other times when the conditions that are behind some of the people, if you will, that are involved in these criminal activities, some of those conditions are, they're societal, they're based on some of the socio-economically disadvantaged neighborhoods that they come from. And so what we did is we kind of had this effort that came from those discussions, which we called the Neighborhood Public Safety Initiative. And we call it NPSI. And the real plan there was for our neighborhood affairs staff, which is part of the department that I'm over, to engage with the neighborhood leaders who were, some of the people that were coming to us and saying, hey, we're concerned about crime, we're concerned about what's going on in our neighborhoods, and to work with them to say, okay, the police aspect is one of it. And we've got this other group that's going to deal with that. But how can we start to positively influence and impact some of those societal issues that were in place? And we engaged with them in a planning process where the neighborhood leaders themselves identified areas of things that they wanted to work on, whether that was, simple as public safety, could be things like community beautification. We know that when people take more pride in their neighborhoods, they're more likely to see something, say something, and do something about it, to elevate those communities. Sometimes it was talking about some zoning issues that they would have where they've got properties that could only be developed in a certain way, where they may think that the neighborhood needs more commercial or less commercial, depending on what that situation may be. Obviously, quality of life in those communities was a big topic. So this wasn't our plan. This was a plan that was developed by the community that we helped facilitate. And they identified those areas of their community that they felt like needed to be worked on. And then we worked with them to identify resources that would be able to be brought to bear on those things. And fortunately, we identified 5 neighborhoods to start with that we felt like were, because of the crime rates that they were seeing and because of some of this, again, socio-economically disadvantaged neighborhoods that we felt like could benefit from this program. And we've to date gone through the planning process and developed plans and had 3 different neighborhoods approved and funded. And then we've got a 4th one that's just completed their initial work and should be coming up for funding in the next few months. And we've still got 1 community that we'll be moving on to next. But it's been highly successful, and we already see the difference that it's making in the communities. And I think the key is, though, it's that citizen neighborhood engagement and involvement that's critical to the success of all this.
And one of those neighborhoods that you've been working with is called the Bond community, I think, right? And I think it's great. The story there seems to be a great illustration of how this works. Tell us a little bit about the Bond community and how the community came to you and how together the plan developed.
So the Bond community is a historically African-American community that's located right adjacent to the Florida A&M University campus. It has a rich history, very vibrant, past of active and engaged businesses and homes. And over the years, it has fallen into somewhat of a state of disrepair, for lack of a better word. Homes have turned over to a lot of rental property rather than home-owned properties. Some of the businesses have relocated, and they started to see this increased crime rate. So we developed partnerships with community leaders that ranged from business owners, church leaders, and then active and engaged residents that lived in the community. And also, and we found this part very rewarding, residents that had grown up in the community and had maybe moved to other areas of the community, but still cared very deeply for the history of that community and the experiences that they'd had growing up there. And they hated to see, that what had happened there, and wanted to see the current residents have those same opportunities and the same experiences that they'd had. So we were able to bring everyone to the table that was interested in helping and have those conversations. And we walked them through the plan, and they identified 4 different areas that they wanted to focus on. And within each of those areas, we talked about the different steps that could be taken. One thing that's important to note is we, as the city government, are not the only funder or solution, if you will. So this was never intended to be, okay, what can the city come and do for me? This is what things need to be done to help the neighborhood. And then who are those people that could most potentially bring resources to the table for that? We're fortunate that this neighborhood was in part of a community redevelopment district. So we have CRA funds for that. And then we also identified grant dollars, of course, and we have some of our departments that had other funds because of the work that they typically do, that we brought them to the table. So like if we are looking at public infrastructure in the area and wanted to improve, say streetscaping and landscaping, we were able to involve our streets department, where that they already had funding available for these types of projects. We were able to work with them, to bring them to the table to get some of those types of projects funded through just normal operating procedures. So it's really been great. There's also a lot of room for community partners and ways that they can connect and engage. And as we go through and kind of start implementing now, we've been implementing for a couple of years, really getting to see the effects of that. One prime example is we have a housing facade program that's funded through CRA dollars, where homeowners can apply for up to $17,000 worth of improvements, anything that's visible on the outside of their home, visible from the street. So whether that's painting, new porch, landscaping, all those kinds of things. But that facelift that you get as you're driving down the street, and where you saw a tired, dilapidated home before, and now you see, crisp and clean and well kept and very well maintained, that feeling of pride in the neighborhood, where we're seeing other homeowners who didn't get funding in these early rounds of this facade program, they're now stepping up on their own and fixing their homes up because of how the homes next to them look. So it's helping to uplift the whole neighborhood. And that's just one example. We have a community park there that we turned an old stormwater drainage easement into a linear park that has just been a huge, huge success. So, and we're only halfway through the process really with them. We've still got a lot of work left to do and a lot of projects to implement. And all along the way, we stay engaged with those neighbors and the neighborhood and keep them up to date and keep them involved and really on board with the process. And it's really proven very successful. And I guess the big question here that some of you may be asking, well, what about the crime rate? Did it help? It has in that neighborhood. We have definitely seen an impact on that. Now, that's not to say there's not still crime, but one of the things that's come out of this effort, obviously the areas that they are engaged with still is working on partnerships with our police department and other law enforcement agencies to deal with those criminal activity pockets within the neighborhood that they see. And it's not, it's not perfect. It's not no crime, but it has definitely been impacted and positively impacted by our efforts, as well as the efforts of the partners that we brought to the table with it. And we expect that will continue as these plans get further implemented all around our community.
Very good. Thank you, Ashley. All right. So I think we've given our audience a sense of some of the stories that you've brought to us here and the things that have been happening. So now I'd like to talk about lessons. I'd like to think about things that you can share with our audience from the experiences you had. And let's talk about first methods of engaging the community. So Kate, I am going to turn to you now. The city of Port St Lucie is doing a lot of creative work to secure engagement for your ongoing strategic planning efforts. You've got surveys, you have a summit. And I think you told me that you even have a strategic planning physical trail that people participate in. So if you would, tell us a little bit about the things that you're doing to really foster more community engagement, citizen engagement with the strategic planning process.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Scott. I think we've been really fortunate at the city that the city council has prioritized using a strategic plan to really guide their policy decisions. It really keeps us focused on moving forward as a city, keeps us all on the same page, helps our departments. I think you see great innovation and people like Linda McCarthy, who's such an innovator in the city, and you see a need and that the city has said, and it doesn't matter what silo it needs to be in, it really is how do we get the outcome. So I think it's really helped us stay focused on the outcome for our residents. And we start with a really robust engagement process. The city council had prioritized strategic planning for many years, but they had challenged us a few years ago to really expand our outreach. And we are a city that's grown through leaps and bounds. I mean, we were just formed in the 60s. We had 300 people in the 70s. We're now over 215,000 people. Wow. We're the 7th largest city in the state. We're the 3rd largest in terms of land mass in the state. So we have a lot of people. It's low density. We're trying to keep a significant amount of our residents commute outside of the city. So trying to keep connected to residents that really it's a bedroom community for many commuters, and finding ways to build that hometown feel, which Port St. Lucie has always really treasured. So one of the things we noticed about our engagement process in the strategic plan is our median age is 41, and we have a lot of people that commute from outside. And the residents that would come to our meetings were typically, it wasn't a diversity of ages, it was the same residents every year, valuable input, great connection, but we weren't drawing a lot of new people into the conversation, and it didn't reflect our demographics. So we decided to change up our process. One, we introduced the National Community Survey. It's through the National Research Center in Polco, and we do a random sample of every Port St. Lucie resident. So you don't have to be necessarily involved currently, and you receive this at their home to take the survey. We also do an open participation survey through that on our website. We're waiting on our results today. I can't wait to hear what the results are. But the open participation survey already generated about 1,200 surveys online this year. And then in addition to that feedback, which we get that in terms of a report that lets us know, where different areas of the city are feeling about different issues. They tell us, how we compare to other cities nationwide. So it gives us some context in our ratings and various services. And then the city council uses that feedback to determine where to focus their strategic plan with where we have areas to grow. So it really gives us where the citizens tell us what the biggest needs are. We supplement that through a citizen summit, as you mentioned. We took that process and changed it up because we had that issue where it was an evening meeting. It was 3 hours long. The same people would come. We changed it to a drop-in event for our citizen summit. We held it on a Saturday and for 3 hours, and you could come for 20 minutes. You could come for 3 hours. It was up to you. We made it fun. We said, bring your kids. We had activities for all ages. We gave them money, and we said, tell us where you would like to invest money in the strategic plan. We had booths. All the staff was able to interact with the residents, which helped them get ideas from the residents and their strategic plan projects. And we gave them swag at the end. We said, you have a t-shirt. We stopped doing t-shirts a couple of years ago, but people still wear their t-shirt from 2 years ago to the Citizen Summit saying, like, I was there, basically. And lots of it was a great community pride opportunity because we got to educate residents. One of the things we heard, and Linda could speak to it, we heard live music was something residents wanted, not something we expected to hear, and so she created a concert series in response to that feedback. Sticks, the concert she mentioned, was one of those opportunities that was created in response to the resident feedback. And when we tell our residents every year, you told us this, and we did this in the past year based on your feedback. So residents keep coming back because they feel that it's meaningful. It's not something that they don't know they feel like their input made a difference. And so we just really find that helps us stay focused on our residents every year and stay focused on our mission.
Good. Well, and I appreciate that comment about the strategic feedback loop, so that people know it wasn't just they gave a comment and it disappeared, and people can forget, and the community as a whole can forget that this decision was made driven by input because maybe they weren't part of that input. So I think that's a really critical piece for maintaining that engagement. Rick, we were just talking about what's this citywide strategic planning process. What you've been doing with that we were talking about with Rolling Hills was kind of on the fly, ending up developing a process. And you said that that's continued to influence work. Talk a little bit about how you've used this model to engage in other situations, and if you would, a little bit the role of neighborhood associations, because I know in some cases, at least, homeowners groups or others have had a significant part to play in that.
That's correct. So the Rolling Hills group worked for a good 4 years before they saw the fruits of their labor and we purchased the property. And of course, the next question was, well, that was our goal. You don't need us anymore. And we said, hold on. No, we've got to put together a master plan. So stay together, and we'll continue to work with you at everyone's homes and so forth, and have the next generation of meetings to figure out exactly how we're going to build this thing going forward. That group stayed together and continued to help us when we hit COVID, and we were in that master planning process of being able to get the word out. So again, that was a grassroots effort of people coming together for a like cause. To say this was going to be a one-off for the county, however, quickly turned into, we bought Rolling Hills in 2018. At the same time that happened, another golf course was going under. So wouldn't you know it, that neighborhood in a different part of the county said, well, we're going to be facing the same thing. This particular neighborhood called Deer Run, they came to us, and unlike the Rolling Hills situation, they had over 20 different HOAs around that particular golf course. It was a much newer development, was constructed originally in the 1980s. So in that case, now you're looking at gated communities, gated neighborhoods, formal HOAs with their own open space that they needed to take care of, but they were facing the exact same scenario. How do we move forward with, and how do we convince the county that they should be interested in buying this open space as well?
So what are some of the techniques you use to keep, because we know, and we've already alluded to this, I think Kate was talking about, you hold a particular event in a particular way and everywhere the same people show up. And so you're hearing from people, it's not unimportant, and those people care and they're engaged, and often they're better informed. But if we're talking about really engaging the larger community, there's always that challenge of how do we bring people into the conversation who aren't already there. So you have all these HOAs, for example, and they have boards and leaders. And so these folks are already engaged, but in those communities, there are lots of people who are not. What sort of steps have you been taking and found successful in getting more folks involved in these processes?
So one of the things that became a critical part of each one of these two processes was engaging the community with the MSBU. In this case, the board approved a process, our Board of County Commissioners approved a process that says, if we're going to seriously consider these types of purchases, we need to hear from the residents, and we're going to base our decisions on that level of engagement. So an MSBU for Deer Run was on the table from the start. And it was, now, how are we going to deal with this one? This MSBU, I mentioned Rolling Hills was the largest one we'd ever done. This for Deer Run was twice that size. So it became imperative that if you're going to get 65% of over 2,500 individual residential units, it included condos that we didn't have at Rolling Hills, all different kinds of ownership patterns and other things that we did not have, but we took that same footprint and applied it at Deer Run. It really required, for a lot of these folks, literally going door to door and talking to their, not just in HOA meetings, but to do specific outreach into different neighborhoods. And they worked with the county on what was the overall list of all of the ownership lists, identifying those that were units that may be rentals because they had out-of-state residents that were there, coming up with different ways to look into how do you get the most out of the fact that it was only a 30-day window that you had to try to bring all of this evaluation from the neighborhood and hopefully clinch the deal at the end. And it required literally door-to-door presence. So working with the neighborhood again and working with these HOAs helped because it had an organization or at least a framework for how to operate. And we didn't have a lot of time to do this particular one. It's had to be done. Rolling Hills took 4 years. This one had to be done in less than a year. And it also included a second golf course that was in operation. So it was a twofer in this case. But in this case, Deer Run was the linchpin on the whole deal, and they came through it as well.
Very good.
Yeah.
And Ashley, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I think just
Yes,
to Richard's point about changing up, and I neglected to talk about the strategic plan trail, but kind of changing up your approach, I think, and kind of listening to what works. That's what we had to do during COVID. We actually had our last big citizen summit with 600 people jammed in a room 2 weeks before the world shut down. And then we had to rethink it because we didn't want to lose the momentum over the past few years of having this great engagement process. So we rethought it as a virtual summit. And then we did this outdoor strategic plan trail where actually we gave people dots and they were socially distanced so they could still interact with people safely outside. And we found it actually very helpful. We did that again this year, but now we're realizing people are kind of wanting to go back to normal. So we think we're going to go back to maybe our old events. So we're constantly having to shift our approach, I think, based on what the indicators we're getting from the community, just to keep that momentum going and to listen to how they want to be engaged with, not necessarily always what's convenient for us. I think that's the key is like, what are the residents' behavior telling us about what they need at the moment and being willing to pivot.
Very good. Yeah, and I'm going to come back to that point about not being convenient for the people who are doing the work, if you will. But before I do that, Ashley, talking about the civic engagement that you've been engaged with, getting the residents involved. And one of the things you commented about, because you are over parks, recreation, and neighborhood services, is leveraging the parks themselves and the recreation programs in this. So talk a little bit about that as one of the tools you've used for expanding citizen engagement.
Well, we took advantage of the fact that we had a community center, recreation center in the neighborhood, in the Bond neighborhood. And we've done it in other neighborhoods as well, where we have community centers either right in the heart of those neighborhoods or adjacent to. And we know that our community centers and recreation centers are the hub of a lot of community activity for all ages, seniors, down to kids, families, everybody. And so we kind of have a captive audience, so to speak. And so what we did is we looked at some of the events that we already had going on and opportunities that we had for engagement with them. And we capitalized on that. They were already there with us, so we could get the word out and make sure that they knew about the opportunities that these plans and the investment that was being made in their communities would afford them individually, but also what it would do for them as a neighborhood. And that helped us encourage more people to get involved and become engaged. We had a neighborhood association in Bond, but there was a lot of the residents that were not engaged or members. And so we brought everybody to the table. We formed what we called a citizens action team, and we relied on them to help us reach all these folks. And some of the things that they kept saying was, let's go down to the community center when you've got X, Y, and Z going on. One thing in particular we have is we have a farmer's market that meets there, depending on the time of year, once or twice a month, but it's very popular and all kind of folks drop in. And so we set up a table at the farmer's market and set up displays and had opportunities for engagement and feedback there. And similar to what Kate was talking about, when we did outdoor events, we kind of adapted. Obviously, we all had the same, COVID challenges and had to do those things, but we were able to adapt. And we have another park in that neighborhood. We were able to do things outside in the park. And I think that knowing when people are already coming together for something else and using that as an opportunity for these other programs was really very helpful for us. It did two things. It got us to reach people that weren't going to see their email, weren't listening to our social media or seeing our social media posts, but they were coming to play basketball, or they stopped by to buy some fruits and vegetables on their way home. And we were able to engage that way with them. We also did a lot of the other traditional methods as well. We had utility email addresses for all the utility customers, and we did email blasts for them. We obviously, put signs up. We went door to door. We have that same issue that I know many of you have, where you've got seniors that aren't tech savvy. You've got seniors that are tech savvy. You've got, some people that are just more or less engaged in social media. You've got all those things. And so we too had to go door to door, did yard signs, posters, flyers. I mean, we've tried to make sure to do everything to try to cover that. But taking the opportunities that were already in place where people were already gathering, it really provided us a way to reach people we just normally would not have been able to. And thankfully, they were interested in, and they engaged with us, and they came back.
So that sounds like a great segue to the question I promised. Kate was just making this comment a moment ago that I wanted to get back to. So what we're talking about in each of these examples, and I know other communities where there's this really serious effort at community engagement, inevitably involves having staff doing things at odd times. It means weekends, it means nights, and it may also just mean a whole lot more contact. It's sort of ironic, right? The goal here is we want the community more engaged, and they're more engaged, which means more emails to respond to, more phone calls, more people saying, hey, can you come by? I've got 5 people getting together. We want to talk about this, which I imagine can be a real challenge from the standpoint of staff. So Ashley, let me start with you and just ask, first of all, is that reflection a reasonable and valid one about the experience? And then if it is, how are you managing this with the staff? And I'm going to ask each of you in turn to talk about that.
It is, and we have some experience with that because as Mr. Durr can attest, when you're in the parks and recreation industry, when are people doing parks and recreation? It's nights and weekends, it's holidays, it's not, during the workday. So we do have some experience with that. And our neighborhood affairs staff has exactly the same issues, because when do neighborhood associations meet, and when do citizens and neighbors have time to focus on these types of issues? It's nights and weekends. But that is a challenge for your staff, because obviously everybody's got a personal life, and trying to balance that out is difficult. We work very closely with them to try to make sure that we're spreading the wealth, sharing the workload, not trying to overburden too many staff, and bringing in staff that can kind of tag team things sometimes if need be. I think the other piece of it is trying to manage expectations, trying to communicate with those neighbors and our citizens that, we've got, it's kind of like once you get the money, you get the plan, you're ready to go. Now they're like, okay, where is it? We want it now. And so trying to manage those expectations and explain to them how the time process is going to work, and the limitations that we do have in place, and then trying to deal with that burnout factor, with the staff as they continue to push and continue to be pushed. It's an ongoing challenge, but I think the thing that makes it easiest is that our staff sees the difference they're making in these communities, and they see the difference that they're making in the lives of people and citizens every day. And I get it that it sounds cliche, but it's really true. I mean, that the work is important and it matters to our staff. And so I think that helps with it as well. But it is a challenge, and it is something that I think you have to be mindful of, so that you as a manager, as a leader, can step in and help when need be. I oftentimes will join them at the meetings, and I'm able to provide some relief and buffer, and then just to help bring in additional resources when needed. And that's one of the things I'm able to do to connect with my other teammates throughout the city. We do a lot of facilitating. Our staff doesn't necessarily have to be the lead on every piece of each part of this. We get the other experts that are in our government to come and join and help, and kind of spreading that out, I think relieves some of that burden as well.
Very good. Rick, how are things playing out in Seminole County in that regard?
I'd say that you hear a lot about COVID hangover. We've got a golf hangover right now. We closed on the last two golf courses on December 23rd of 2021. So congratulations, we now have two defunct golf courses at different stages of redevelopment. And we now have a golf course that Seminole County had prior to. We've never had a golf course that we've owned and maintained. So now we're figuring out how to run a golf course. So we hired a consultant to help us out there. So that was a big help. But the bottom line is that I use a coaching metaphor that you hear a lot about, saying that you want to put your folks in the best position to succeed. And in this case, it just not is within our leisure services department, but it requires just about all the other departments that you need to wrangle and bring into this process. I can't have my parks division manager somehow thinking that he's going to sit in on an acquisition meeting to negotiate what's in the greater spots of a land deal. No, we've got to get attorneys involved and so forth. So a big part of that is making sure you stay out in front of the process, take your lessons learned, and then make sure that those folks, while they're still doing their day job, so to speak, also has all the support that they have going forward. But it is a huge team effort.
Okay. Kate, how about for you? What's it like in the city of Port St Lucie?
Yeah, we're really fortunate to have a great team, of course, and the great support of the city manager and the city council. I think because this is such a top priority with their strategic plan, it helps, I think, all of us focus on that. And what we do try to do is, through this event, make it like, we'll gather all the people for this one time. If you have a question or something you need to provide outreach to the community, it's like a catch-all, So in that way, I think we provide maybe an efficient resource for a lot of departments to do their outreach in one day. On a lot of issues, and that it's that continuous loop. But it is always, of course, challenging just because we're getting busier and busier. I think, I think managing it's when you engage the residents, you said, like, then you get more engagement and there's more to filter through. So we try to use our systems to like through the strategic plan, where all that feedback comes in, then the council sorts it out and advises, what they want to focus on. So then we know where to invest our resources instead of going after a million different ideas. So that helps us a lot.
Very good. Kristen, I think we had a question pop in that would probably be a good question to ask.
There's actually a question from Bob.
Okay, good.
He wants to know, how have elected officials responded to your various civic engagement efforts? Appreciative, skeptical?
So Ashley, you want to start with that?
Sure. Our elected officials have been extremely pleased with our efforts. It's helped them make decisions. We've been able to provide feedback and information and really be able to show them the engagement and where this information came from. And it gives them a sense, because it's a more formalized process, it gives them a sense of security, knowing that all efforts were made, all voices were heard to the greatest extent that you could. And they're able to have some comfort level in taking the recommendations and providing funding for them, approving funding requests for them because of the engagement that we have. This isn't willy-nilly. This isn't one person coming to them asking for money. They're really able to have that comfort level. So they've been completely supportive, very appreciative. They've also participated. They've come to a number of the meetings. They've engaged with the community as well. And it really is, the program's been recognized as kind of a model, and it's pieces and parts of it, I have no doubt, are going to continue to be used in other neighborhoods throughout the community, even after we get through the first 5 that we were working on. And I also can tell you that we've, I think, influenced some of our other city departments as they've worked on projects for, their particular specific area, where those utility projects, infrastructure projects, they've seen how the methods that we're using are being so well received by both the residents and the elected officials. And I think we're seeing them adopt some of that communication and engagement as well. So overall, very, very well received and supported by electeds, as well as, other executive leadership within our government as well.
Kate, I have the impression the same is true for you in Port St. Lucie.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that council definitely is very proud of that process. And they refer to it often when there's citizen feedback, saying, it gives, I think, an avenue to direct residents' energy into that there is this process already set up that we use every year. And I think they've just, it's part of our culture, I think, as a city now. And so I think they've just, I appreciate that very much, that they are so supportive of it and open to hearing all the feedback. It's a vulnerable process, I think, for elected officials, to kind of open yourself up that way. But I think we've seen, we had an interesting, when we did the National Research Center survey, we didn't know, because there was a change in leadership and staff, that about 9 years before that, we had done a survey. So we had this comparative data, and we were able to see in the first year of the survey that the city was up 30% in many areas in satisfaction. So I think having that feedback saying we're on the right track, it gave the council, I think, even additional confidence that what their decisions they're making are really affecting the residents positively, and that they need that constant feedback to make sure that we're on the right track. So,
Rick, how about you, Seminole County?
Absolutely, especially when we had to make the switch during the pandemic to an online platform. There was some skepticism, no doubt, about, well, what kind of input can we really get? I mean, we can have folks send out a survey and at least find that out, but by putting together a platform with a number of different ways for them to leave different types of comments and be involved in many different ways, we're able to quantify the fact that even though we hit COVID, by shifting gears and using these other tools, just the sheer amount of and quality of the input that we've received far surpassed anything we've done prior to that. So it very much became we did this because we had to in the situation, but boy, did we learn a lot about how to reach folks in their home and get good feedback from people.
Very good. Well, we're going to come close to wrapping up here at this point, but I have one last question I want to ask everybody. I'm going to give it to Linda first, because I've got to prompt your answer from something we talked about earlier. But I want to give everybody a chance to think for a moment about the one tip about this conversation. We're talking about how we leverage the point of contact we have with our residents to get more engagement. So you can think about that. And specifically, Linda, when you and I were talking earlier, we were talking about the partnership building. And I asked you, how do you think about this? And I think you said something along the lines of, I always try to put someone between me and the challenge. And then you had to explain that to me. If I've got that right, would you talk about that idea and how that helps you, bridge those gaps, break down some silos, bring people to the table?
Right. Scott, well, I mean, as far as the Boys and Girls Club example I talked about earlier, I mean, our mission really is as mandated by our city council is I should be generating revenue with every event I do, right? So that's what event facilities do. We generate revenue, or we bring in new money from visitors as a tourism attraction with bringing people in for outside events. So when you go to talk to your bosses and elected officials about helping nonprofits, yes, that's part of their strategic plan, but how do you help a nonprofit? But at the same time, you've got to pay the bills, right? So, I tend to try to put the Boys and Girls Club in between me and the elected officials have to approve that, because it's much easier for them to explain what their need is. They're the expert in what the Boys and Girls Club need. I'm the venue. I can provide the four walls that helps the community and helps the organization. And, Kate mentioned our concert series. I mean, there's no better person to put between me and the budgeting process to do concerts than the citizen survey, right? Because I don't know, I think it's up over 38% of the public wants more entertainment. This is not Linda McCarthy going, I need the money to do a Styx date, I need the money to do a Little River Band date. The community wants this. So, and it's right here in this survey. And so, I mean, it's such a valuable tool, as Kate mentioned, not just for the citizens' engagement, but for department heads like me that need that feedback to be able to program this building based on what our citizens want. And so it's just a valuable tool. And thanks to Kate for getting that going every year. But it's got to be someone else asking for the programming and not Linda McCarthy going all the time, trying to put something in a budget. So it's got to be a community-wide effort and working outside of these silos.
Very good. Rick, how about you? I gave you a chance to think about that tip. What tip would you like to leave with our audience?
Be flexible any way you can. You're going to put together a process, but then you need to listen to that process and what begins to emerge out of that. If you're going to engage folks at a larger degree than you really ever have before, you're going to learn some things along the way that may surprise you, or you're going to have to adjust for things like the global pandemic, that kind of a thing. But you need to make sure that you stay on top of what you're hearing. You're continually providing feedback back to your elected officials, and then adjust as necessary, and you'll find yourself in a good spot when you get to the finish line.
Very good. Thanks, Rick. Ashley, how about you?
I think I'd have to say that it's the value of having everyone involved in solutions, having all the different partners at the table, all of the different stakeholders at the table. We can't come in and tell people how to solve problems in their neighborhood and and whatever that translates into for other people's projects or programs. It's being able to listen and have the people that are directly impacted and affected be part of the solution. If we just came in and rebuilt sidewalks and didn't do anything else and didn't have buy-in and engagement from those neighbors, they'd have new sidewalks, but they wouldn't have the sense of community. They wouldn't have the new connections that they've made. They wouldn't have the people capital in place, if you will, to be able to deal with future problems and future issues in their neighborhood. And so what we're leaving behind is not just bricks and mortar or sidewalks, concrete. We're leaving in place a network, if you will, and a way that those citizens can remain engaged and continue to be able to make those changes and be part of the solution. And that's, to me, is one of the biggest lessons here. And I think it carries over in a lot of different areas.
Thank you, Ashley. Okay, so you get the last word on this, and hopefully they didn't use up all the great ideas that you have. Go ahead.
Well, I did want to cover one thing that I haven't touched on yet is to partner with, when communicating and outreach, partner with your experts, your in-house experts, which for us is our communications department. We have a phenomenal communications department that has partnered with producing the Citizen Summit every year. And I think without their help, we couldn't be as successful in reaching and making sure everyone knows about what we're doing. So I would just recommend really partnering in your engagement efforts with your communications team whenever possible, because that really can help you get your, spread your message further, and just keeping the whole connected. I think that whole vision, we keep repeating it every year, our vision statement, and keep almost that repetition of constantly having a way in residents know how to get involved, and having that available kind of on-ramp for them, I think is really important. So there's never a question about how to get engaged, and that can just keep building.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, Kristen, I'm going to offer you a counsel here. I'm concerned that we don't want to lose this wonderful interview, which is being recorded. And I have a concern that if you swap host back to me, we might. You know this better than I do. So just if you don't feel like we should swap host, so we can preserve the recording, because this has been great. And we've seen some comments, by the way, from people in the audience just really appreciating it. So I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to each of you for being a part of this. Linda McCarthy, Director of the Mid-Florida Event Center, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Scott. I enjoyed it.
And Kate Parmley, also from the City of Port St Lucie and Director of Strategic Initiatives and Innovations and Strategic Planning Trails. Thanks for being with us, Kate.
Thank you so much.
And we have from Seminole County, Rick Durer, who is the Director of Leisure Services. Rick, thank you for your stories. It's been very helpful.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
And Ashley Edwards from Tallahassee, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Neighborhood Services. Thank you for all the insights you shared with us as well.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. So, Bob, is there a last word you would like to share with us? And then we'll remind people while I'm thinking of it that we have an upcoming next Florida Civic Advance First Friday is, guess what? The first Friday of April. And it's worth noting that that is April 1st. We can all smile about that. By the way, I was sworn into public office in 1991 for the first time on, yes, April 1st, April Fool's Day. But this will not be a foolish thing. A wonderful program on engaging seniors in Civic Advance, co-hosted by AARP Florida and the Florida Civic Advance. You can go to the FCA website to register for that program. Bob?
No, Scott, no fooling. April 1st, the program will continue with First Fridays. Thanks everyone for participating and sharing the civic lessons. We're committed to, we made a recording of this and we'll place it on our website and then try and reach out to people who would be very interested in knowing of these success stories at the neighborhood level.
Thank you, Bob. All right, so I want to thank everybody in the audience. Thank you again, everyone on the panel. Kristen, thank you for making it all work seamlessly. Greatly appreciate it. You all have a wonderful afternoon and a great weekend.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.